There you go. That's it.
All right. And I'll go sit down.
Yeah.
Just don't ask me to smile.
I didn't get the drift of what it was. I read something about
That was so referred to again in some of the other books, wasn't it?
So what'd you do to your foot or leg?
Oh, it's just a little callus.
Yeah.
I'm on cancellation just over at Perry May's office.
Did you go there?
I've never been there. I mean, they said cancellation.
Yeah, I know they're
Whatever better in the better classes, cancellation was just like that, right? With all the stores. Nobody's canceling.
I go sick every 6 weeks when I got screwed up with the J. Dallas. It took me forever to get back to something. They looked after me, but I've been going there for 15 years.
It's actually really just because first thing
Well, if you get corn, he tells me it's pressure.
right.
And if you get calluses, it's negative.
Yeah, it can't be French. It's gotta be French.
I had 5 in there. I was walking around with stuff with my slippers on too much, on padding it. So I do.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out this evening. It's a beautiful night, so again, appreciate everyone coming out this evening. My name is Tom Fincher, and I own and operate Fincher Store here in Goddard with my wife. And we're pleased this evening to have Barry Ruhl here with us. He's here to give us a presentation on his book, and I'm going to give you just a short bio on Barry, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to Barry. At the end of his talk, we're going to open the floor up for questions. And after we're finished with that, we can go out into the hall, and there's refreshments there, and if they would like to get a book signed, Barry will be available for that as well. Barry is married to his wife, Pat, who's here this evening, and close to the front row here in the far corner, for 43 years. They have a son, Jeff, and they're grandparents of 2 wonderful children, and they have a cat named Tuffy. She's only 18 pounds. She's a calico cat who lives up to her name, according to Barry.
Scary. Very scary.
So, yes, just 18 pounds. He was a member of the OPP for 30 years. He was an addiction counselor for the OPP when he retired 4 years ago. Is that right? Is it 4 years?
Yeah, 90, 40, 98.
Sorry, 98. For 4 years he was an addiction counselor. Sorry.
It's gone a long time.
Uniform, he was an undercover supervisor in the crime unit, coordinator of victim services, crowd control commander, and pallbearer commander for the police funerals. Graduate of the University of Waterloo in sociology, and York University, a Bachelor of Social Work. Hobbies include gardening and wetting the line with not much luck. Presently, he's in the process of writing a second book, which is titled Booze and the Badge. I'd like to introduce Barry Ruhl.
Thank you. I want to first of all thank Tom for putting this together for us tonight. I was here, I guess, 15 years ago when Julian Scheer was here with his iconic book on Stephen Truscott, Until They're Dead, or whatever the name was. And I talked to Julian at the time, and never did I realize that at some point in the years to come, I would be writing a book. But I have written a book. It's called A Viable Suspect. And my viable suspect I call Larry Talbot. Larry Talbot is not his real name. I don't use his real name out of respect for his family. And that's exactly why I did it. Although I could use his name because he's dead, I didn't bother doing that. In 1970, I was working at Talbot Beach, and we had a number of break-ins. And someone told me to watch this Talbot guy, and I did, but I could never get him for anything. In 1971, on June the 29th, Larry Talbot came into our cottage in a violent cottage invasion with Pat and my wife present. I want to share with you some of what happened that night. A loud noise woke me out of a deep sleep. My first groggy and irritable thought was that some of the other cops were playing a prank on us. But as I stumbled out of bed stark naked towards the bedroom wall light switch, I almost bumped into a dark figure in the doorway. A man in a garish orange mask holding a flashlight and pointing a gun at my face. This was no joke, and this wasn't one of my cop pals. "What's up, buddy?" I asked cautiously. There was silence as the armed intruder stared at us and slowly backed into the living room. Then he uttered a terrifying command, "Get the bride out here." "Leave her out of this," I replied. Suddenly Pat appeared, wearing a short, slinky nightgown. In a gruff voice, the intruder ordered her to raise it. Pat, in a timid, almost inaudible voice, replied, "I don't think so." He pointed a menacing gun. "Lift it or I'll shoot." Tremblingly, she slowly raised it. The intruder lifted and lowered the gun in an unspoken command to make her move faster. And as she raised the gown, he was thrusting his hips as if he was having sex. Come on, that's it, that's it." Suddenly he stopped and ordered Pat to get my wallet. She retrieved it from the mantel. I didn't want him to see this because there was an OPP flash on the side of the wallet. I grabbed it from him and I threw it on the floor. By now he was standing at the rear door and ordered me to pick it up. "No," I said. He pointed the gun at me. "Pick it up or I'll shoot." "I don't think you will," I replied. He stared at me for a second, then bolted from the cottage, grabbing Pat's purse as he fled. I went after him, chasing him south along King Edward Drive. It must have been a surreal spectacle for any unfortunate enough to have witnessed. It's a masked man being pursued by a naked man on King Edward Drive in Talbot Beach. "Get back," he yelled. Suddenly he turned and fired a shot, hitting me in the chest but not stopping me. I managed to grab the back of his coat and he swung around and struck me several times with the gun. I was injured but managed to wrestle him to the ground. I got on top of him and attempted to get him. He attempted to get up, but I pummeled him until he surrendered. "Let me go, don't call the cops," he pleaded. I removed the mask and immediately recognized him. "I am a cop, Talbot, and you're under arrest." Talbot appeared at Provincial Court in Walkerton on September the 21st, 1971 before Judge H.C. Mosser. He was represented by W.T. Station and Howard Hines from Hamilton and entered a plea of guilty to the charge of armed robbery. In an attempt to mitigate the sentence, Talbot's legal team presented a psychiatric report prepared by Dr. A.J. Renton, who assessed Talbot and didn't believe he would be recidivistic. There were a number of character witnesses who testified that Larry Talbot they knew was a good person and gave examples of the positive things they remembered about him. The following is the relevant part of Judge Mosser's summation. "Mr. Talbot, I have had the opportunity to peruse the reports of Dr. Renton and to consider carefully the statements made by counsel and the character evidence of your friends, which is all very favorable. These people have traveled a long way to say many good things, and yet when you consider what happened at Talbot Beach, it must be shattering for the people who live in the area to learn that something like this can happen to someone who is a very kindly person and a very model citizen. This makes sentencing very difficult. From Dr. Renton's report, there's little likelihood of you repeating the act that took place at Talbot Beach, and there's very little likelihood that anyone in the immediate vicinity of Talbot Beach is going to be imperiled if you're given a suspended sentence in a probationary period. Mosser found Talbot guilty as charged. He was given a suspended sentence with 2 years probation. He was also prohibited from returning to Talbot Beach for 2 years and prohibited from possessing firearms of any kind for the same period of time. Pat and I were extremely shocked and disappointed. This didn't seem like justice to us, and as it turned out, the judge and psychiatrist couldn't have been more wrong. There are a number of unsolved homicides in Ontario, and I believe Larry Talbot should be considered a person of interest in several of them. In one particular instance, an innocent teenager was convicted of the 1959 murder of Lynne Harper. Was this Talbot's work too? This is I suppose most of you have seen this if you've been to Talbot Beach. It's been there forever, welcome to Talbot Beach. This was Talbot's rape kit. This is what he used when he came in on us. The gloves, the mask, it was out of an industrial cloth. He cut his holes in it and used butcher cord to tie it. There's a circuit breaker down to the right, a skeleton key, and an extremely sharp knife there, extremely sharp. I want to draw your attention to those. Those are 4 sets of hockey laces he brought into the cottage. Why do people bring hockey laces into a cottage where there's a young woman? Sorry. In 1973, a couple years later, I got a call from the Oakville Police Department. And it was an officer from Oakville, and Larry Talbot, he told me, was the prime suspect in the murder of a 17-year-old girl that had been hitchhiking outside of Oakville. She just left her mother's residence and was heading up to Milton where she lived. That night, around midnight, there was an officer that was patrolling Henderson Park. It's a bush area north of Oakville. And he found a car that was backed into a bush. And no one was around it. So what he did was he took the license plate down and he left. That was it. Just wrote it down. Good for him. 2 weeks later, they found her body 1 mile from there on Lower Baseline Road. She was murdered. And this cop that had the license plate went to the detectives and said, I saw this car, here's the plate. So they go to Talbot's residence, 15 minutes away in Burlington, Ontario. And they said to Talbot, would you mind if we looked in your car? He said, no, go ahead. So they opened the door, and on the headrest, there was a spot of blood on the back of it. More importantly, there was a bunch of hair on the rear floor, and also one hair that they said was forcibly removed. It was caught in the side of the door panel. Center of Forensic Sciences looked at this and they said, this hair is similar to Pauline Ivy Dudley's. Similar to. The cops opened up his trunk, and in it, a rape kit. Wooden dildo, desensitizing cream, Vaseline, ground sheets, 2 well-used flashlights, pair of green pants with a spot of blood on them, t-shirt, surgical gloves stuffed in there, wire. Very neat. The trunk is very neat. So they submitted this guy to polygraphs and he failed them. Failed 3 of them. Well, I'm on the phone with this Oakville police officer and he just wanted information from our break-in. What happened to us? And so I sent him everything I had, 73. I had other agendas, and I never thought anything else of it because, you know, it wasn't my case, it was his. Never heard anything else from him. In 1981, I was promoted and sent to the Barrie Crime Unit, and I was assisting in the supervision of crime across that district. And I got called to it was the sexual assault of a 10-year-old girl. Some of you may have remembered it. Maybe not. Wasaga Beach, someone went in the middle of the night. They took a 10-year-old girl out, tied her hands, took her to a car, and they sexually assaulted her. So I went over to assist in the supervision of the crime, and I'm walking around the cottage, and at the back door, the door is open. It's opened by a block of wood. Right away I thought of our cottage, our break-in. Pale against the door, holding it open. Why? Quick exit. Smart. Quick exit. So I thought, I wonder if Talbot is still up to anything. So I called Talbot Beach and talked to a buddy of mine there. Larry Talbot, anything going on? He said, coincidentally, the night before last, he was caught running through the bush. A guy by the name of Doug Murray, he's been there forever. Cop, good cop. Chased him down. He's taking off a pair of leather gloves as he's running. So they grab him. They go to his trunk, sharp knives in it. Oh, I stole a couple of chairs. Stealing chairs. He confesses to stealing 2 chairs. So that's what he's charged with. I decided this time to call this Oakville police officer again, which I did. And I said to him, Larry Talbot, what's going on with him? He said he's still the prime suspect in the murder of Dudley. We don't have enough to charge him. Remember what I told you? Don't have enough to charge him. So I said to the guy, would you send me everything you have on him? I'd like to have a look at it. So he did. I got to tell you, I'm looking at this stuff, and I have an epiphany. There's a very good possibility he killed Dudley. A very good possibility. He's a traveling salesman. What better occupation for someone that wants to kill? You could be in Goderich here, you could kill somebody, you could go up to Kingston, because he had customers all over the place. So I decided to submit a report to the OPP. Essentially, he said that we should look after this guy, we should chase him or watch him. They come back and said we don't have enough manpower, and they dropped it. In 1983, I read 2 stories in the Toronto Star. They were 2 murders. The first was Christine Prince. She was an English nanny. Anybody remember Christine Prince? English nanny. And she was abducted from downtown Toronto. She was taken up to Scarborough, dropped in the Rouge River by Sewell's Road. She'd been murdered. Hands had been bound. Larry Talbot had been in Toronto that night. Larry Talbot